a full consultant team with a whole range of sub-consultants, including services engineers, civil engineers, landscape architects, etc. And the work that you'll see tonight is the combined effort from all of these consultants and a broad team internal to council over the last couple of months. I think, Caroline, it might be worth skipping to the project timeline now so I can give everyone an overview of where we're at in the project and what we think it looks like from here on in. So you'll see here on the screen, we've got a planning phase, which I just talked to at a very high level, which in no way does justice to the incredible volume of work that's been done by many in the community over many long years to bring the project to this point. We are at the early quartile, I suppose, of the design phase. We'll be running through the design phase in 4 stages. We've just completed concept design. We'll be moving through schematic design for most of the latter part of this current year. And then we'll be working into detailed design early 2021, followed by documentation with a view to tendering for construction in the middle of the year and breaking ground on site by the end of 2021. Without having a clear picture and having made clear decisions about what the first stage of construction will actually comprise, we're really estimating that we're looking at 18 months of construction. That could be less than 18 months. But with that reasonably conservative estimate, that would take us through to March 2023 to begin occupying the facility and start using it. We are seeking community feedback with the updated concept design. And then we'll be coming back to the community again during schematic design in the next few months, having worked through the feedback that we've received. And we'll be checking that everything's still on track and getting some further input to start to shape up what that first stage of construction should really look like. So that's the overall shape of the project, I suppose, and a very, very brief history. Once City Collective have finished their presentation, as I mentioned, we'll talk through the consultation process and we'll have another timeline at that point that we can talk to. But without further ado, I'll hand over to City Collective. Take it away, guys.
Thanks so much for having us. I appreciate everyone joining us this evening. And so the little bit about the cadence of the presentation, we'll kind of talk through a little bit about, why we're here, why we're doing this project, some considerations about the site. And then we'll kind of get into where we've kind of gone in terms of the conceptual design process. And we'll land on where the preferred the preferred concept design is today. So to start, we just wanted to kind of talk through the need for the Macedon Ranges Regional Sports Precinct. So the first major point is, today there's limited indoor courts, sports fields, and community facilities where growth is most likely. So in this area in particular, and as Justin Walsh mentioned earlier, in that 2006 leisure plan, there was a big gap that was identified that's going to happen between now and 2036, in which there's really this need to have at least 2 additional ovals for AFL need and at least 4 to 6 netball and basketball courts for indoor sporting needs. And there's a kind of a long running list in that leisure plan about the kind of demographics and growth information, particularly in the Gisborne and New Gisborne area, where this need just needs to be met for recreational and community users. And this project, first and foremost, seeks to absolve that need. The second is that this project is about building on the success of the existing netball pavilion and facilities. So we've already started to, Macedon Ranges has already started to build out this recreational kind of precinct to start. There's a really good starting point with the existing netball pavilion and the existing outdoor exterior netball courts. And we think that's a great starting point for the rest of the precinct. And something, you know, at the end of the day, the concept design for the precinct and for all the facilities really wants to build upon long term. In terms of the precinct today, it's as Justin Walson mentioned earlier, the site is at the intersection of Bringo Road, which is running north-south in orange there, and Hamilton Road, which is running east-west there in orange. It's actually pretty close to the existing kind of residential area to the south and the existing Gisborne station to the south. That's only about a 400-meter walk. It's actually very, very close, a lot closer than this map kind of indicates. And it's kind of paired between a couple of different assets, being the Montessori School just to the north and the Holy Cross Catholic Primary School just to the south. And other than that, it's kind of captured or encircled by existing kind of more less dense residential and or a handful of industrial uses as well. And so the site itself and the precinct is located in a really great spot just for that residential uses to the south. The site today in particular is relatively empty. There's not actually a lot of things that exist on the site today. There are a handful of really significant and lovely trees. So you'll see large trees that are highlighted in green. So there's a few to the north and to the south, particularly on the east side of the site. There's a few high diversity, wetland areas. So you'll see, you know, those are highlighted in blue on the eastern side of the site and the western side of the site. And then the other challenge, or how we see it, an opportunity, is that the site right now is challenged with dealing with stormwater management. So how to kind of capture and deal with stormwater in a way that won't impact the site or impact neighboring sites. There's kind of two big kind of slopes that both parts of the site have, and you see that described with the white arrows. Really, it's moving from the intersection of Bringo Road and Hamilton Road and moving to the northwest and then to the northeast. You'll also see on the western part of the site, of course, the existing netball pavilion, the existing netball courts, and the existing car park today, which we're you know, we've kind of charged ourselves to keep all those three items in place and then provide a concept design around those existing elements. So at a very, very high level, you know, the brief requirements that we're really looking for, and I'm not going to belabor this point too much, is we've identified kind of the key elements as a sports hub. So the sports hub is going to be the kind of larger, of course, indoor court building. And that includes the 4 to 6 netball courts. That includes key amenities like cafe, dining area, change facilities, bathrooms, etc. Then there's the sports pavilion, which is a supporting building that supports mainly the 2 ovals. That includes items like a social space, change rooms, medical room, timekeeper room, etc. The next is the sports fields themselves. So a natural turf oval and a synthetic turf oval mainly for practice. The potential for tennis courts and netball courts, which you'll see as well. And of course, cricket practice nets as well. And then the last one being a kind of the landscape and stormwater component around the site. And you'll see kind of major components such as vegetated swales. You'll see vegetated ponds. You'll see items that are, of course, car parks, communal spaces, and you'll see things that just end up becoming a requirement both for social requirements for the site as well as ecological requirements for the site. So for the vision, you know, I'm just going to actually read this one because we worked really hard on the vision statement. But the vision for the Macedon Ranges Regional Sports Precinct is an integrated community recreational heart where athletes, junior athletes, and the community come together to participate and watch local sport. Characterized by diversity and bolstered by key moments and places, the architecture and the landscape underscores the precinct's robust and enduring, transparent and welcoming character for the Macedon Ranges community of today and tomorrow. So to summarize that statement, it's really saying that we wanted to create a key precinct, one whole place where recreation and community was really celebrated and welcomed. And it's not only something that worked in the short term, as in the great stuff that the netball pavilion, the existing netball pavilion and courts offer, something that also works really great in the midterm. So, you know, Justin Walsh mentioned a project that, you know, is approximately, you know, stage one at $30 million, works really, really well at the midterm, but also thinks very, very long term. Well, what does recreation mean in, you know, 20 years time, and how does this concept design cater to that? So something that really works for the community today and all the way into the future. So when considering the precinct, we've really come up with 4 key concept design strategies. The first one in particular is to create an east-west pedestrian spine that links the precinct together. So one thing that we really heard loud and clear coming into the project was that we wanted, that council and the community really wanted to create one cohesive place. One place that, you know, the community could come together and not feel like, you know, netball was over here and tennis was over there and the community, you can go over there. Something that felt like it was really one identifiable place. And we thought that creating a key public element that helped link all of the recreational uses and the community uses together would help give a common identity for the precinct. And that's where the idea of this east-west pedestrian spine really came from. The second is to front recreational uses onto the pedestrian spine. So kind of building on that idea of having one common place, having all of the major recreational items and community items, such as the sports hub, the sports pavilion, the sports fields, tennis courts, etc., all have a direct link to that pedestrian spine, reinforces that one common identity for the precinct. The third is to create what we call a single front door with a centralized drop-off forecourt. So having the ability to create a drop-off area between both sites on Baringo Road, we thought really enhanced the identity. So to have one spot where I could, you know, pull up and drop someone off or pick someone up in one common location, on both sides on Baringo Road in that one spot, really helped further identify this as one single precinct. And then lastly, for design strategies for the precinct is to capture vehicle traffic before reaching the pedestrian priority zone. So actually pulling the egress and ingress points for the site for vehicles further north and south and east and west away from the intersection of Baringo and Hamilton, so that cars can be captured into the site earlier on and allow for that east-west connection for pedestrians across Baringo Road to be relatively uninterrupted by cars that are trying to drive to the site, but without having to drive through that particular area. So you see that the key components for the precinct in particular are the sports hub. You'll see that to the, I'm going to actually draw as we go. So that right there is the sports hub. The second is the natural turf oval. So you'll see that slightly to the south. That's that guy. The synthetic turf practice oval, which is just to the north. You also see the sports pavilion, which is at the intersection between both those ovals. The sports precinct drop-off, as I had mentioned, is located right in the center. So that being that I can arrive either from either from the south or the north and drop off on the sports hub side, or I can actually come across and drop off on the sports field side. Next is the multi-use courts. So you'll see located in that area, it's 2 additional exterior netball courts that may also be used as community tennis courts. You'll see the addition of tennis courts at the end of the pedestrian spine, totaling 8 courts long-term. And then going around the site, you'll see I'm going to do my best to try to trace this, but you'll see what we're calling a recreational loop, or a walking and biking loop around the site for kind of more passive recreation users. And this is a more detailed plan. It more or less says the information that I just mentioned with some additional detail. Talking about the location of car parks in particular, you've got this existing car park plus a slight expansion here. You have a more traditional car park arrangement to the eastern side of the site that encircles both the ovals, really building on the legacy of kind of pulling up in your car and being able to watch the footy or watch the cricket. And then you have a slight expansion zone on the sports hub side, in kind of off of Bringa Road's drop-off area, where this can be used as overflow parking or expansion space, particularly during tournament days, or it can actually be closed off the majority of the time and be an open space for recreational users.
So we'll move into some of the detail around the buildings on the site, and the first is the sports hub. So building off some of the principles that Justin has spoken to for the overall precinct, we started to think about those in terms of how they relate to the buildings on the site as well. So the first one here is creating a central entry foyer that connects to the pedestrian spine. So this is starting to bring pedestrians through from the existing facilities, the car park access points that Justin's touched on, the drop-off entry area, and then also connecting right across to the sports pavilion and the rest of the sports field site. So this becomes a key component, and you can see that highlighted in the key principle number 2, where the foyer space is really the active zone where a lot of those functions come together and start to culminate as a pedestrian connection through to the courts themselves and then the supporting amenities. The third was starting to look at the orientation of the building and how the different functions were sort of grouped together to be able to maximise the aspect, trying to look at the siting in terms of some of the ESD considerations, trying to capture some of the prevailing winds and elongate the courts area to be able to utilise that to cool the building. And then the fourth is looking at, again, those supporting areas. So capturing the courts in one kind of component of the building, and then this L-shaped ancillary component is capturing all of the amenities that will support that area, which we'll look at in a bit more detail. So this is the overall building, and again, we've highlighted some of these key elements. So we've got that main lobby and foyer space, which will connect between and have great visibility of all of the activities that are going on in the centre. You'll be able to see through from that space into the activity that's happening in the courts. And we've positioned the future potential show court right at the front of the building. So you'll have the connection from the drop-off area along Baringo Road, really showcasing what this building is, the function that it's capable of, and the excitement and activity that's happening within the space. The rest of the courts kind of flow through this area, and there is potential for a total of 6 in the overall precinct planning of this building. We move then across through the spine of the foyer space. We have some direct connections to the south of that space with the cafe dining area, that will serve for people attending whatever function may be being undertaken in the court area, and also act as a catering facility for the function space as well. Also connected to the foyer is an administration and a merchandise area. So again, high visibility, good connection to the street frontages and the pedestrian spine where the volume of traffic will be congregating. The other supporting elements are change facilities for both public and for the players and for umpires. So we have a bulk of the southern part of this building dedicated to those amenities, being able to be accessed externally for the existing pavilion and courts on site, and also then internally. In the more detailed layout, you'll start to see some of those amenities in a little bit more of the configuration, a little bit better in terms of the configuration of how we've started to set those up. So there's been a real focus on the inclusive and the accessibility components of the building, making sure that they are safe and functional, female friendly, and accessible for all users of the site. So we mentioned about the internal and external access. We've got the teams facilities, dedicated areas for umpires, and family-friendly facilities as well for small children to be able to access with their families, and then the players from the external courts being able to access more amenity than what is currently available on the site. We've developed some images that really start to speak to the architecture of the building and the excitement that we're wanting to create as you enter this precinct. Again, we kind of capture the language that starts to tell you the function of the building. You could get great visible access as to what is the function that is being undertaken at the time. It should speak to you quite clearly about the wayfinding of the site. The canopy structures that link this pedestrian spine will start to guide people as they enter from whichever part of the precinct they might. There's obviously multiple access points, which starts to break down the need for Baringo Road being such a dominant access, and then starts to direct people across the precinct and create a language that makes sense as you move through these spaces. So this highlights the drop-off zone and the activated front of the sports hub. Within the foyer space, again, we speak to this being this active zone that starts to visibly give people the language of understanding how to direct around the site and between the different functions of this area as well. Clear access into the activities that are happening in the court space, access to the reception desk and the cafe are front and centre as well. And this is creating a light, airy precinct that will join the sort of major elements of the site. And then within the indoor courts area itself, so highlighting some of the key features of the building, the large expanse of glass to Baringo Road, again, highlighting that connection to the other activities of the site, looking at areas where we can start to provide the ventilation and ESD requirements that we need to be able to cool these spaces, looking at the utilisation of the peripheral area for storage, knowing that there's a lot that needs to be accommodated within these spaces, so trying to build in as much future flexibility as possible. And then this is the other side of the pedestrian colonnade, again connecting through from the existing facilities on site, and that real demarcation of wayfinding from the car parking areas, drop-off areas. This is the area within the precinct where we have designated bus drop-off as well. So there would be quite a bit of traffic and volume being able to connect between all of the spaces across the site within this area. So there's been a true focus on functionality in terms of the planning of this building, well-connected spaces, and again, that focus on inclusive areas and accessible areas for all of the users. The building itself is starting to take shape. So these are our preliminary concepts, starting to test some of the materiality, looking at the overall form and how it can make a statement across the site, depending on or from whatever direction you may approach the building. And the building itself, we're looking at a simple palette of materials, but understanding that putting those together in a well-detailed and contemporary way will start to speak volumes to what this building can do for the overall precinct. And this will start to give you a sense of how the sections are coming together and the overall roof form as well.
For the eastern portion of the site, and when it comes to the sports fields, we came up with a similarly 4 sets of strategies. The first is to locate that natural turf oval, which we're considering the main oval, on axis with that pedestrian spine. So when the community arrives off of that drop-off area, you walk directly onto the center point and view onto essentially that center point of the oval, creating this kind of lovely premier viewing experience as you're arriving. The second is to locate the pavilion, right, what you see there, just between and on axis with both of those ovals, both to the north and to the south. Once again, highlighting a premier viewing and spectating experience for people that are coming to watch, either cricket or footy on both ovals. The third is to complement that pedestrian spine and that kind of heart of the site with community and social uses. So starting to pair together that spine that we mentioned, which is running there and kind of protected by the ovals away from the majority of both kind of vehicular roadways, plopping in where the kind of, more informal meeting spaces or seating spaces, playgrounds, and a couple of courts, something that really activates the center of the site, but also is protected by the kind of natural amenity of trees that you see there as well. And then lastly is to create spectator mounds around the ovals that provide really an ideal viewing experience for people to come and sit and relax and watch matches. So kind of going over the major parts and pieces on the eastern portion of the site, the natural turf oval, of course, is to the south. The synthetic turf oval, as I mentioned earlier, is to the north. The sports pavilion is located in between them. You'll see the multi-use courts located here, that being the mainly netball use with potential community tennis use. You'll see the cricket practice nets located just there for warm-ups before and after cricket matches. Spectator mounds you'll see located just to the west of the natural turf oval and just to the east of the synthetic turf oval. The playground is located just in between the courts and the end of the pavilion, so in approximately that zone, tucked in between the kind of informal meeting spaces and protected away from the existing roadway, the drop off, and the ring road that you see to the east. And then lastly, we introduced a half court just to the north of the playground, something that's a little bit more informal for, the young professionals or young teens to come in more of an informal setting and something that people can just walk up and enjoy while there's also other more formal matches going on. So this is a view, if you're standing just north of the playground, looking south towards the natural turf oval, you'll see the pavilion over to the left-hand side. You'll see in the distance, you'll see the natural turf oval, and you'll see really the ability to sit and watch your younger kids enjoy the playground while being able to look a little bit in the distance and see your older child, participating in sport.
So looking at the pavilion in a bit more detail, again, we've broken up the principles of how the pavilion has been orientated and some of the key elements. So Justin's gone through a few of these already, and the first is really about creating the axis around the social space, which is central to the pavilion. This has great lines of sight and connection to both ovals, and so that gives that real flexibility in terms of the use and how it could be prioritised for either of those spaces or again for a separate function. The second is looking at the areas that surround the pavilion itself, and again recognising that connection back to each oval and how we could use those external spaces as a spill out zone from the social space as well. So by looking at extending some of the roof lines, creating sheltered and areas where you could gather, we can look at some seating or some informal gathering spaces to be able to view the games that are going on either side of the pavilion. The third was the location of the kitchen area and the kiosk. Again, trying to look at this site in terms of all of the users that may be accessing these functions. So recognising the fact that this will be for both the sort of active and passive recreation across the whole precinct. There'll be people wanting to access the facilities who are there purely to either participate or to spectate for either of the games that are going on the ovals, or there'll be those that are arriving for a more passive recreation activity, coming to use the playground informally or accessing some of the natural beauty around the site in a more informal way. And then finally, we looked at, again, the need to create the internal-external access for public amenity, recognising those different uses that would be happening across the precinct and potentially the different hours of operation as well. So looking at the amenity that is available for the internal spaces for the social space, and then also the external access for direct access from the playground areas and from some of those court areas that will be introduced in future. So the key components of the pavilion, which we've touched on slightly, are the central social space. So this will be a truly multifunctional area which can have flexibility to hold a variety of functions. Again, highlighting how the visual connection to each of the ovals is obviously the primary connection for this space. Dedicated storage areas for that space is also incorporated, again, being able to give it the flexibility to be set up in a multiple different formats. It is directly connected to the kitchen space, so externally for the kiosk and then internally for catering for that space as well. Either it's kind of bookended then by the amenities. It's split for the player team change areas. There are 4 dedicated change spaces. So an open change area and then amenities for showers and toilets, and then a dedicated massage and strapping area for each of the teams. Towards the eastern end of the building, we have the medical room and an office space and some additional external storage. This is directly accessed from the new driveway network that has been created, and so then easily accessible for ambulances. Then down towards the western side, where we have the connection to those more informal spaces, we've gathered the public amenities that I touched on previously. Again, looking at that inclusive use, making sure that there are accessible functions both for the internal provision for the social space and also then for the external provision for the playground area and those multi-use courts. Just to touch on the team change facilities again, female friendly and inclusive facilities there to be able to dedicate a use for any of the players that are participating in matches across the site. So a more detailed plan will show you the functional relationships between these spaces and really highlighting how they connect with the external spaces around them. Again, you'll start to see some of those roof overhangs visible to create the sort of kind of secondary activities that can happen around the perimeter of the building, and then how the internal network is connecting through from social space to the amenities provided. This image captures the other direction to where the playground was viewing previously, showing how the extended roof line not only creates a very dominant feature within the site, and showcases the architecture of the building, but also opens up that aspect to the ovals and creates that true connection between the space where you can see both ovals functioning at the same time. Access to the kitchen and kiosk directly off that space as well. And then we mentioned about the kitchen being accessed internally. And then again, highlighting the connection of all of the uses of the site and really trying to make sure that this is fully accessible for everyone and the different functions that would occur. Again, the elevations have started to develop so that you can start to see some of the overall heights and the different roof forms across the site and materials that are being used. There's been an emphasis to create a cohesive language across the site so that both of the buildings do talk to each other. As you're navigating across the site, you'll start to see those familiar language elements again, that it starts to make sense as to how the precinct comes together as a whole, and again, help with the wayfinding across the site and just the sense that this is one precinct operating with lots of different functions. And then looking at the overall profile of the building itself, sitting within the landscape.
Evening, everybody. My name is Francis Dickinson. I'm the landscape architect working with City Collective and Council on the project. I'm going to speak with you about some of the landscape design strategies and initiatives that have been designed into the concept. We have 4 key strategies that we've been working with to develop the site design and the landscape with our architects, engineers and council. One of them is that under the landscape architecture umbrella, we're heavily involved with managing water across the site, and key to that is working with the topography. So we'll be looking at how to manage water in a bit more of a sensitive way across site. So rather than capturing water and putting it into hard engineering pits and pipes and diverting it off site, we're going to look at trying to capture as much water on site for either reuse, for passive irrigation, and also just sort of infiltration generally across the site. And this will be done by a few things. We're going to have what are called water sensitive urban design treatments, which will be closer around the buildings and the sort of more hardscape spaces around pavilions and sporting areas, where water drains off to garden beds and swales and things like that. And then as you sort of get into sort of the more sort of open landscaped parts of the site, we'll be looking at sort of using swales, vegetated swales, that in summer would sort of be more like sort of dry sort of creek beds, and in winter will be sort of lush green, vegetated sort of, not really creeks, but they'll have a sort of a very much difference from the sort of landscape around them in terms of how much water goes into them, and they'll be channeling water down into our sort of main water assets in the corners of the site, where the water will be detained and where it can be reused or it can just be stored there. Some of the other things too, there's a series of significant pieces of vegetation, whether they be trees or clusters of trees or native vegetation that are spread around the site. We've been working hard with the architects and engineers to make sure that these areas are maintained and protected. So the design sort of works around them and with them. And one of those is actually sort of an ephemeral, which is sort of a wet, dry, native landscape area that we're going to integrate with some of those water infiltration swales and channels that I've been talking about. One of the other key things that we've been doing with the site is to look at it as a regional recreation asset, open parkland that has a life beyond the organised sports and activities that will go in and around the hub and in the sports fields and courts. So there's a lot of land in the site. And we want to make sure that that functions in a couple of ways for both what we would describe as passive recreation, or that sort of informal recreation, but also that it can work towards creating things like habitat and tree planting, and using native vegetation. So there's an ecological function that the site can carry as well. And part of that is our fourth strategy around the tree planting. We're looking to achieve 25% or more canopy cover over the site. That'll be made up of retaining a lot of the existing trees, but also planting new trees. And when we're talking about trees, we'll be looking at both, what's native and important in terms of natural landscape for Macedon ranges, but also where we can use some of the sort of European species that are, synonymous for the area, whether they be the autumnal foliage, and using them kind of strategically to create avenues and particular points of interest across the site. In terms of the site plan, Justin's covered a few of these, but we've been working with the team to sort of place things like spectator mounds in the right places to sort of blend them into a landscape, but also create a function that people can sit on the hill and watch sport. I've talked about the sort of the wetland, pond, and the rain gardens. So rain gardens will be typically more around your buildings and your car parks, capturing that runoff from hard surfaces, whereas the vegetated water detention basins and the swales will be sort of blended more into the broader landscape. One of the key things we're looking at and designing into the concept is that the site's going to have a lot of picnicking, seating and gathering areas. Some of them will be close to the pavilions to support the pavilion and the sport days and the different clubs and activities that go on. But some of them will also be away from those sort of spaces and more in the sort of parklands areas as a destination in themselves for picnicking, barbecues and gatherings, and just a day out walking in the regional parkland. The other key thing that Justin mentioned before was that we've designed a fitness bike loop around the perimeter of the site. And this one will be a nice, generous wide path that enables people to walk both directions, bikes, pedestrians, right around the perimeter, which will be a great asset in terms of local health and well-being. I mean, if you're a runner, you could run this circuit, or you're an avid walker. It's going to be one of those things that you can go around the whole circuit, but also connects you into a lot of the different destinations around the precinct. Justin spoke about the pedestrian spine. This is a sort of key landscape area where there'll be lots of seating and shade and wayfinding and paving that connects up all of the key sort of sporting destinations and recreation destinations through from the sports hub right to the eastern side. And then there'll be a secondary path network, and some of that path network won't have anything to do really with sports. It might be just sort of networks of paths that are sort of to meander through the landscape and carry down to some of the destinations, like a boardwalk deck that sits down in the northeast corner of the site. A couple other things that we'd probably look at too is that towards the east there's a lot of native remnant vegetation. We'd be looking to sort of design our landscape to blend with that, but we're also very conscious of the views and the beauty of the sites. We're working with the architects to sort of blend landscaping and architecture to sort of make sure that the buildings fit nicely in with the site, and that it's a very harmonious design of the precinct. This is a few images here, give you a bit of an idea. You've got a few people on the fitness loop there, football, oval, the pavilion in the background, the sort of landscaping of the mounds, the blend in both with the landscape and with the ability to view the games. Probably some of the other things we'll be doing in the landscape too is that, yes, we do have a designated play space, which is really centrally located to make sure that it's in a nice observable spot. you're watching a game, your kids are playing in the playground, it's very easy to see what's going on. But when we're looking at things like nature play, being integrated all around that fitness loop and throughout the sort of passive recreation areas. And here's just another shot of one of those passive recreation areas, picnicking areas, a shelter, nice treed landscape, secondary path network, and sort of in the far distance behind the man with the camera is that sort of destination of the sort of boardwalk lookout over what will be the future wetland.
To finish our presentation, we'd love to share with you an animation of the site, which I hope brings together all of the elements that we've spoken about throughout the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Caroline, Justin and Francis, for your presentation and for the consideration that's been folded into the design process so far and everything that's been presented this evening. So while there's a reasonable degree of detail in what's been shared this evening to articulate the concept, it's only the first in several big steps through the design process as we move to constructing stage 1 of the sports precinct. There's still a lot of work to be done as we drill into very detailed requirements that we'll need to meet in order to meet and support the aspirations of the community in this precinct for many years to come. And many of you who are here this evening are really heavily involved with community sport. You're well versed in what works and what doesn't work so well in our local reserves and facilities. Many of you have a long history of advocating for the major components to this project, and you've invested a lot of your personal time and energy in helping the project to this point. We need to know, and we want to know, what you think of the updated design, what's working well, and where there are opportunities for improvement from your perspective. As I mentioned earlier, we're opening a period of community consultation on the concept design this evening, and that'll run through until 22nd of September. And the material that you've seen is now available on the Have Your Say page on Council's website, along with a short survey, which will allow you to tell us a bit about what sport and recreation activities are really important to you and what you like and dislike about the updated concept, whether you'd like to discuss any of this further with myself and others in the team. And of course, you can send us your thoughts in a submission completing the survey as well. As we move into and through the consultation period, council staff will be reviewing all this material that's been shared this evening and much more. And we'll be completing what we call an end stage review. So we'll be looking at what's working and not working in the delivery of the project at the moment. We'll conduct a lessons learned exercise, and we'll be implementing minor tweaks and changes to how we deliver the project in the next stage to act on those lessons that we've learned. As we commence schematic design, we'll be putting in place the measures that we need to from the lessons that we've learned from the concept design stage in terms of the project delivery. We'll be working through council's feedback, internal feedback on the concept design, and progressively drawing in the material that's coming through from the community, from the general community consultation process. At the same time, we'll be updating what we call the functional and technical brief for the project. So it's a very long list of detailed, minutely detailed requirements for every last space in the precinct. Everything from how big it needs to be to what type of lighting and audio visual and power and everything it needs, what spaces it needs to be next to, how it's going to be maintained, things like that, what storage requirements. And this is really where we really need to draw on some of this detailed experience from the many people in the community who have quite a lot of experience using council facilities and don't have an unconscious bias, I suppose, that council would have in running these facilities. Having said that, we're well aware of many things that can be improved, as well as what does work well that we should be applying to this precinct as a starting point. And so don't be dismayed if you see something that you think doesn't quite work well in terms of the layout of a building, or a room that you think should be in there that's not, or something that should be bigger or smaller. That's really the core purpose of the next stage of design, which is schematic design. We'll be working through all of that fine detail. And towards the end of the schematic design stage, when we have draft schematic design, we'll be coming back to the community again for further consultation, just to be checking in that we're getting it right and everything's on track. But also to be really down into what are the real needs for construction in this facility right up front, to help inform a decision that will need to be made by council early in 2021. So I really encourage everyone to jump online and have a closer look at everything that's been presented this evening. Don't hesitate to get in touch and sort of start a conversation with us. That'd be really helpful. And please, I know many of you are very well connected in the community and have very broad networks of people who use these types of facilities in council at the moment and who've been heavily involved with this project from an advocacy standpoint for many years. So yeah, please do encourage networks to engage with this process and give us the feedback that we really need. I think that's all I have to say on the consultation process, and we've just landed at 8 o'clock. I will note that, as I mentioned earlier, we have had a couple of questions coming in, and we are preparing, I suppose, a list of frequently asked questions that we'll put in the questions section on the Have Your Say page of Council's website. We know that there are some big questions out there in the community about the project and what's in scope and what's out of scope and why, and when will decisions be made and how will they be made, what gets constructed first and what gets constructed later, things like that. So we'll be providing responses to those types of questions, and we'll be sort of updating that regularly. If we're seeing that there are a lot of questions that are coming quite consistently, we'll be providing answers to those as well throughout the consultation period. We won't just wait until everything's done and dusted. So thanks again for your time this evening. I really appreciate your interest in the project, and yeah, as I mentioned, don't hesitate to get in touch if you'd like to chat further. Thanks very much.